The film opens with a former Special Forces officer named Mason, who is currently isolated on a remote island. Once a week, Mason was approached by his friend to deliver food supplies. Mason's friend didn't come alone. He often invites his nephew Jesse. No one knows why Mason never left the island. Haven't even been to see Jesse. Mason will leave the house taking orders when Jesse and her uncle are gone. Mason is very closed and does not want others to know his whereabouts. And here's shelter. 1 week later, Mason is approached by Jesse, delivering Mason's necessities. Jesse doesn't know who Mason really is. Out of curiosity, Jesse immediately delivered the order to Mason's house and wanted to give a gift. Mason is unhappy and asks Jesse never to come to his house again. With a disappointed heart, Jesse soon returned home, because the weather was getting worse and had to rush home. Jesse boarded a small boat, but suddenly a storm came. Jesse crashed into the ocean.
Don't give me that look.
From a distance, Mason who saw. Without thinking, Mason hurriedly took the boat to save Jesse. Although he didn't seem to care, Mason was worried and didn't want Jesse to drown to death. With all his might, Mason swam against the strong ocean currents to successfully get Jesse onto the boat. In the midst of a great storm, Mason kept trying to resuscitate Jesse by continuing to press against her chest. Mason had been worried, but lucky Jesse realized, and it relieved Mason a little bit. Then Mason immediately took her into the house to be treated. At night, Jesse woke up. She asked where her uncle was. Mason reluctantly told him that Jesse's uncle drowned. Jesse could only cry because she had no one else. The next day, Mason noticed the wound on Jesse's leg swelled up from being wrapped in the net. Mason attempted to treat Jesse's legs with a simple remedy, although it can only slightly alleviate the pain. Then Jesse asked why Mason hadn't contacted the medical team, or at least get Jesse to the hospital. But Mason just kept quiet and say nothing. Jesse was so angry because Mason didn't have the initiative and only treat with simple medications. Jesse wondered who Mason really was. And why choose to isolate yourself on a remote island? Mason was silent and never said a word, because Jesse will never understand. When Mason goes outside, Jesse secretly takes a knife. Worry, maybe Mason is a bad guy. Then Jesse immediately went back to bed and hid the knife under the pillow. At night, Jesse kept talking because she had a nightmare. Out of concern, Mason tries to wake Jesse up, but surprisingly, Jesse held a knife. Mason took the knife, then taught Jesse how to hold the knife properly, until Jesse felt that Mason wasn't a bad person. Days later, as usual, Mason prepared breakfast and saw Jessie already alone with her dog, enjoying the ocean view. Then Mason called for breakfast. Then Mason continued playing chess even though he was alone. As Mason would move the chess pieces, Jessie told me how to checkmate. Mason smiled for a moment. I just found out that Jessie can also play chess. Then Mason checked Jessie's leg wound, and apparently even had an infection, and had to be treated immediately. But Mason still won't take Jessie to the hospital, and prefer to go to the city to buy medicine. Mason finally arrived in the city and immediately headed for the pharmacy. Mason also bought some clothes for Jessie. She hasn't changed her clothes for several days.
Well, I thought we would go bowling instead. It's a bit more fun though.
On the other hand, the British senator again summoned MI6, officials to explain the spy program they had created, because it was proven to spy on the privacy of the public. Manafort said, if the software can prevent threats much more effective than existing. Three months later, Jessie was seen relaxing in a cafe, and unwittingly she was again monitored by MI6. It turned out that Mason was also there, but still, based on the information obtained, the data appears that Mason is a target of MI6 and is of very high value because it is known to have carried out the bombing of the British Embassy office. The new MI6 chief named Roberta immediately ordered the Alpha team to arrest him. Mason returns home, giving Jessie food and some clothes, making Jessie even more convinced that Mason is not a bad person. Jessie changed clothes, and it fit Jessie's body perfectly. While there, Jessie felt very happy, especially Mason's cooking turned out to be quite good. Then from a distance, Mason saw someone coming to the island. Mason quickly ordered Jessie to hide in the bathroom with a knife, because likely they came to finish Mason.
Weapons free.
Mason immediately got ready to wait for their arrival and started activating some traps. He turned on the lights to make it easier for him to attack the enemy. Mason slipped behind the rocks, and when the enemy came, he immediately beat him. On the other hand, the enemy entered Mason's house but was attacked by a pet dog. Unfortunately, Jessie was caught and she would be taken to the boat. At the same time, Mason was hiding in the dock, and when the enemy came, he immediately attacked and hung him. The enemy came back, and finally the action of scuffling could not be avoided. Seeing that Jessie was about to be taken away, Mason quickly picked up the rifle, and then Mason immediately walked over to Jessie, making sure that she was good. Mason immediately checks the attacking enemy, and turns out they are MI6 troops. Mason asks Jessie to wait. He will bring supplies because they have to get off the island before the MI6 troops return. When he returned home, Mason was sad to see his dog dead. Then Mason calls his friend for protection because his hiding place is not safe. Meanwhile, Roberta realizes the troops sent are all dead. Roberta was told that Mason was not the target. Roberta asks other teams to arrest Mason and Jessie for questioning. The next day, Mason and Jessie, who were hiding from the chase, tried to get help because Mason was injured. Mason walks into a house and asks Jesse to wait outside. Mason taught Jesse how to hold the right weapon. From there, Mason went into one of the people's houses, looking for a needle that would be used to sew his wound, but Mason was known by the owner of the house, and immediately held at gunpoint. Arriving from behind, Jesse appears. And finally, the homeowner helped Mason to suture his wounds.
What am I looking at?
Madison tells Roberta, if the terrorist profiles they found yesterday have been manipulated, they are misidentifying. Madison pointed out that yesterday's man was Mason, a former British elite, but had been declared dead in action. Roberta becomes more curious because there must be a big secret hidden. In the middle of the conversation, they get news that a child is reporting crimes committed by Mason. Roberta will order the team to arrest Mason and figure out what really had happened. In another place, Manafort just got the information that Mason survived the MI6 attack. It shocked Manafort because all this time, Mason was still alive. From there, we get the fact that Manafort has secrets with Mason, and if exposed, then his reputation could be destroyed. Manafort immediately ordered the mercenaries to capture Mason and told him not to listen to the commandments from Roberta. Sin moved on to Mason where he finished treatment and decided he would leave soon. But Mason realizes the child from the family has gone to the police, and it won't be long before the police come.
Sit there. Don't move.
The situation becomes very tense because MI6 wants to take over the ambush, but local police have surrounded Mason. Suddenly, the owner of the house came out. Mason quickly forbade, but they didn't listen. Suddenly, the situation became worse as the mercenaries began to launch attacks. Shoot the police if they get in the way. Mason hurriedly invited Jesse out of the house, but was blocked by the police. Mason fought in an injured body condition, but did not overwhelm him, and managed to overthrow the police very easily. Mason took some weapons and car keys to facilitate their escape. Mason and Jesse escape immediately, but the mercenaries don't want to let that happen. Megan continued to go fast, occasionally checking Jesse's condition. Mason went into the forest trying to trick Manafort, but the mercenaries didn't just give up. He continued to follow Mason. They continued to chase after the chase, and even the mercenaries had fired a few shots at Mason. Mason finally braked the car and turned things around, where now Mason Yang is behind the mercenaries. Despite the hard impact, the mercenaries can still survive. Then he intercepted a passing motorist, and when he stopped the car from behind, seen the police coming. Meanwhile, Roberta asks Manafort who Mason really is. Manafort tells that Mason was an elite squad that used to work under his lead. But Manafort lied to Robert, saying that Mason had failed to carry out his duties, had falsified reports, and betrayed the government. Medicine has found data about Mason's last mission. It was ordered to kill Iranian scientists who had helped the British government build nuclear weapons. Mason refused the order, so he was hunted down. But Roberta didn't realize that she was being watched by professionals. At the same time, Mason and Jesse are on their way to a friend's house for help. Jesse is shocked that Mason is an important person, but is being hunted by the government. Jesse is grateful that Mason continues to protect her, because now Jesse has no one else. they finally arrived at a place. Mason asks Jesse to stay on camera, but with sophisticated eye software, easily they can be known because the camera is recorded. I don't want Mason's position to be known by MI6. Manafort deleted the footage and gave the location to the mercenaries to immediately finish Mason. After a long journey, Mason meets his friend, who is a hacker, while in special forces named Maze. Mason was a little surprised, because Maze was in church even though Maze was not a devotee. Maze was quite shocked, because they thought Mason came alone, but even brought a child. Mason and Jesse are taken by Maze to her residence for a break, while thinking of how to protect Jesse. Mason doesn't want Jesse to know he's leaving her. Mason asks Jesse to go back.
And I'll start figuring out how they found me.
Mason asks Maze to help find out who knows his existence. Maze says MI6 has advanced software that he once developed. But somehow Mason's history data was swapped with a terrorist that caused him to be hunted. Hearing that, Mason immediately thought that it was all the work of Manafort.
Manafort.
Because the Meson data can't be hidden anymore. But Maze can't do that, because it turns out he's having cancer. Of course, Mason really didn't expect it, because Maze hid it from him. The question is answered: why this end Maze so obedient worship?
What if I go to Kamal?
Mason thinks to meet a mafia who can create a new identity for Jesse to live abroad. Maze reminded, because the mafia is very cruel and can Mason even killed. But Mason had no other choice, and Maze would take him to the mafia. By morning, they realize someone was coming. Mason immediately asks Jesse to hide, and he will be ready to wait for that person to arrive. He was the mercenaries who came to kill Mason. With the ability that Mason possesses, as much as possible, avoid the shot and counterattack mercenaries. With all his might, Mason continued to release blows to make mercenaries feel overwhelmed. But the mercenaries fought back, and they each unleashed blows to exhaustion. Silently they prepare weapons, until the scuffling action was resumed. Mason gave the mercenaries no chance to fight. But Mason starts to fatigue and the mercenaries fight back to make Mason depressed. Then suddenly Jesse came pointing a gun. But the mercenaries quickly seized the weapon. Luckily, Mason quickly dodged and attacked the mercenaries and immediately took Jesse out. Maze swiftly took them in the car to escape. It didn't take long for them to arrive at a place. Then, Maze gave Mason a hat so that Mason wouldn't be too flashy. He also gave Mason a cell phone so they could continue to communicate. Because it's likely Manafort's men will continue to chase. Before going, Maze tells Jesse to be careful and must stay with Mason. They continue their journey to a Masonic Mafia acquaintance, but along the way, Jesse grieves that she will part with Mason. Jesse refuses because he wants to stay with Mason. He has no one else. But Mason is strong, and it's all for Jesse's good. Finally, they arrived at a club owned by the Mafia. Then Mason purposely left himself on surveillance camera so he could meet the Mafia. Mason beats people there, asking to be brought before the Mafia. It turns out Manafort already knew where Mason was, but without realizing it, Medicine tracked him. Manafort should not have access to the eye software. Roberta will also make calculations and send MI6 agents to secure Mason before he is killed by Manafort's men. Mason meets with the Mafia, asking for a new identity for Jesse. The Mafia won't help until Mason says MI6, and Manafort's men will be coming soon. The Mafia will also fulfill Mason's request. Not long after, the Mafia came with a passport and some money for Jesse. When Mason notices the arrival of MI6 and Manafort's men, without thinking, Mason beat them up. As if there was no commotion, Mason quickly paralyzed them. But even though he tried to disappear, there was still a commotion. Mason keeps attacking them while making sure Jesse stays with him. Then Mason was caught off guard until he was attacked by two people. The atmosphere turned chaotic and the visitors began to scatter. Mason loses Jesse because he was taken by Manafort's men. Mason quickly calls Mace to tell where Jesse was taken.
She's cut across the square and turned south. She's being carried towards a...
With hints from Maze, Mason chases the car that kidnapped Jesse, but Mason gets barriers. Mason beat them all up because he didn't want to lose Jesse. Mason finally managed to save Jesse. But they must leave soon. After being chased by mercenaries, Mason took Jesse to the dock because someone was waiting to take Jesse to move abroad. Upon arrival there, Mason reinforces Jesse that everything will be all right. But Jesse refused because she wanted to stay with Mason. Jesse can't imagine living alone without someone she knows. Mason is hard to part with Jesse, but Mason has no choice for her safety. Then arrived, they were shot by mercenaries. Mason immediately threw Jesse on the ship. Mason gets ready to fight the mercenaries who keep shooting at him. Mason carefully opened fire, but because each of them is equally out of bullets, in the end, they chose to fight with their bare hands. As always, Mason, always superior, makes mercenaries very overwhelmed. Mason was so sick that the mercenaries kept chasing him without knowing what was the reason behind the Manafort order. Mason didn't give the mercenaries a chance to fight until the end. The next day, Manafort saw his guards lying down. It turns out they were all finished off by Mason. Manafort tried to calm Mason down because he was the most formidable army he'd ever had. But Mason didn't care about any of that and chose to finish off the man who had made his life miserable. Three months later, Jesse was seen relaxing in a cafe, and unwittingly she was again monitored by MI6. It turned out that Mason was also there, but still stayed away from Jesse, so as not to make her dangerous even though she had never met again. But Jesse realizes that Mason will always be there, and will always protect her.